Today on the newscast, an update on the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Will Israel send ground forces into Gaza to confront Hamas terror head on? Get all the breaking details coming up. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast, coming to you from TBN's New York City studio. But as I sit here in New York, the Middle East is quite literally on fire. Israel is facing major problems, to say the least, on two fronts right now. Of course, with some 1,500 rockets at last count coming out of Gaza, raining down on Israeli cities. And then we have internal strife between Arabs and Jews in several Israeli cities. But let's start with a quick update on the situation in Gaza. As I mentioned, this is ongoing right now. I'm coming to you on Thursday, May 13th. It's about 11 a.m. on the East Coast, which means it's 6 p.m. in Israel right now. Some 1,500 rockets are blanketing literally every area of Israel right now. Tel Aviv, where some 70% of the Israeli population lives in and around that Tel Aviv metropolitan area, continues to be barraged with rockets on a regular basis. They're also hitting now Beersheba, which is in the Negev desert. It's Israel's fourth largest city. And then we have Eilat. Now, Eilat is at the southernmost point of Israel, at the mouth of the Red Sea. Hamas has unveiled in this conflict their latest rocket. It is a long-range rocket. It weighs some 550 pounds. And today, sirens blared in Eilat, some 155 miles from Gaza, as rockets were incoming aimed at Eilat. Now, this is the longest range rocket that Hamas has ever used. They have unveiled this in the latest conflict that is ongoing. We had sirens as far as Nazareth in the Galilee last night as well. So, folks, this is a different conflict in a few different ways. Number one, obviously the distance that Hamas rockets are traveling. This long-range rocket, for instance, that reached as far as Eilat today, again, over 150 miles. The distance, the size of the rockets, and the payload, the lethal capacity that these rockets are carrying, that's number one. Number two, these are sustained barrages. Now, in the last go-round between Israel and Hamas in 2014, the summer of 2014, nearly 7 years ago, yes, Hamas sporadically launched rockets towards Haifa, Tel Aviv, Beersheba, and points a little further away from their Gaza home base. But this time, there have been sustained and daily barrages against Tel Aviv in particular. That is a new level, without a doubt. Hamas is also using suicide drones, attack drones. We've talked about them many times here on the Watchman Newscast, supplied by Hamas's Iranian master. More on that in a minute, and Iran's larger role looming in the background of this conflict, which I believe right now, folks, we can classify this as a war. There may be a ground invasion coming. Again, we'll get into that in a minute. One of Hamas's major goals with these long-range rockets that are targeting Tel Aviv and now Eilat is to shut down Israel's air travel. Those targets are no coincidence. Some of these rockets are falling near Israel's largest airport, Ben Gurion International Airport in Tel Aviv. When I travel to Israel, that is where I fly into, Ben Gurion Airport. Right now, it has been shut down to incoming flights due to these consistent rocket barrages in and around the Tel Aviv area. Not only that, the targeting of Eilat, which I mentioned, again, folks, not a coincidence. Eilat is the site of Ramon International Airport, which is Israel's second airport, opened not too long ago. Hamas's military leader, Mohammed Daif, he's the leader of the Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military wing. He reportedly has made very clear that he wants to shut down all international air travel coming into Israel right now. Long term, clearly, that will have a major economic impact on the Israeli tourism industry, which has already been slammed due to COVID-19. Israel was just ready to start coming out of the COVID economic disaster. Tourism was about to begin once again later this month, in fact, and now this. And we don't know how long this latest conflict is going to last. But Hamas has a very specific aim here, folks. And it's not only the Hamas that has the aim, it's the Iranian regime, the puppet master behind the scenes, pulling the strings. What has Israel's response been so far to this sustained, unprecedented, in many ways, onslaught? Well, heavy airstrikes against Hamas and Islamic Jihad positions throughout the Gaza Strip. Who is Islamic Jihad? That would be Palestinian Islamic Jihad, yet another Iran-backed, armed, funded, and supported terror proxy, which is very lethal and armed to the teeth, operating inside Gaza alongside Hamas. Now, Hamas is the big dog in Gaza. It rules the Strip with an iron fist, but Iran has their other wolves of jihad, I call them, in the form of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, also raining down rockets. Israel has eliminated several Islamic Jihad commanders and has reportedly hit Hamas very hard. The Hamas leadership has been targeted by Israel in these heavy airstrikes that the Israeli Air Force is conducting around the clock now against Hamas targets in Gaza. Now, several Hamas commanders taken out. Hamas says that is the source of the continued rockets against Tel Aviv. It's revenge for the death of their commanders, so says Hamas. But the leadership has been targeted, number one. They still want to get, does Israel, Mohammed Daif, or Mohammed Def, I think you pronounce it. He has been in hiding for years. They've eliminated people close to him over the past few days, but he is still out there. He is the leader of Hamas's military wing, obviously a very big fish from Israel's perspective. Israel has also struck several of these high-rise buildings in Gaza, which house the Hamas intelligence and military infrastructure. So they've taken out a good chunk of that. The big question now, does Israel go in on the ground? Israel just called up thousands of reservists. Tanks have reportedly moved closer to the Gaza border. So does Israel feel that to eliminate this rocket threat coming out of Gaza, that they will need to enter Gaza on the ground? That's the big question being discussed right now. Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cabinet and the security cabinet were meeting today, Thursday, May 13th, to discuss the possibility of a ground invasion of Gaza. Rewind to that last conflict that I mentioned in the summer of 2014. Israel did a minimal ground incursion into Gaza to stop Hamas rockets. Almost 60 Israeli soldiers were killed in that conflict. If Israel did a large-scale invasion, many more would likely be killed, unfortunately, and you know the world will howl and castigate Israel as the aggressor for defending itself and its citizens from thousands of rockets. The situation right now, some 7 Israelis have been killed by these rockets. Many more have been wounded. Over 70 Palestinians have been killed. The Israel Defense Forces say that most of them are Hamas and Islamic Jihad members. But remember, folks, I made this point yesterday on our Watchman Newscast live stream. You can check it out here in our archives on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe while you're there. Many times, Hamas uses men, women, and children, the elderly, innocent civilians, as human shields. And they intentionally place rocket launchers in the middle of densely populated civilian areas. So Israel calls off those airstrikes. They do not want to kill civilians, but it's hard sometimes, almost impossible, when Hamas intentionally places civilians in harm's way. So that's something to think about as well. Moving on to the bigger picture right now. Okay, is a ground invasion imminent? Is this going to escalate even further? I consider this a war right now. Some people are saying, well, is this going to become an all-out war? When do we classify this, folks, as an all-out war? I guess all that's left is if Israel feels compelled to invade on the ground and take on this Hamas terror head-on at the root on the ground. Heavy urban fighting, you get the idea. The bigger picture before I go, I want to share with you the Iranian regime. No one is really talking about Iran right now, but we've been talking about this for months here in the Watchman Newscast. You know that if you watch us on a daily basis. We're coming to you every day, Monday through Friday, and sometimes on the weekends, and we have been telling you again and again that Iran wields this ring of fire that surrounds Israel right now on all sides. Gaza is one node, I guess you would call it, in that ring, which also includes Hezbollah to the north, some 150,000 rockets and missiles, Iraqi Shia militias to the east, the Houthis in Yemen to the south, Syria as well. The ring of fire, Iran has now activated one part of it in Gaza. I hate to use this term, but this is somewhat of a dry run for the Iranian regime. They're seeing the impact Hamas has, number one, and the reaction of Israeli civilians, the Israeli military, the Israeli political class, which has been very disunified, as we know, over the past few years, the international community. So Hamas is being used right now, of course, by the Iranian regime, its master in Tehran, in this effort. And Iran is sitting back, and folks, I can guarantee they are closely observing. I believe they are preserving their most lethal proxy, Hezbollah, for a future engagement. But in today's Middle East, expect the unexpected. Anything can happen, but I would be surprised if Iran activates Hezbollah. At the end of the day, folks, look, if the world community, which is pressuring Israel relentlessly right now for defending itself, wants this to stop, they could pressure Iran and say, call off the wolves, stop the rockets. What Iran says, Hamas must do. Clearly, Iran has not had enough of the carnage yet. They are the power behind what is going on right now. If you hate to see, like we all do, the carnage going on right now, civilians being killed, look no further than the Iranian regime, which sits in Tehran, the head of the snake, which is engineering all of this right now, and which again wields this ring of fire. Lots going on. We will continue to bring you regular updates right here on the Watchman Newscast. We want to be your one-stop shop for all things Middle East, in particular right now, obviously, this conflict. We're coming to you in real time every day. Continue to keep Israel in your prayers. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray for the Palestinian civilians who are being abused by their Hamas overlords and suppressed and used as human shields. Let's pray for a swift end to this conflict. But before anything ends, I think Israel really, what are the goals? Israel needs to establish a lasting deterrent. Lasting. 2014, that was accomplished for some time, but now here we are again, not even 7 years later, and we're seeing the same thing happening over and over again. When does it end? Keep the situation in your prayers, because God Almighty still sits on the throne. Thanks so much for joining us today here on the Watchman Newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more, make sure you go ahead and hit the like button, click subscribe, and tap the bell icon to turn on notifications for new Watchman Newscast episodes every weekday.